Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I move to the substantive motion, I just want to join you in, as you did earlier, in expressing heartfelt condolences to a number of persons who have passed since our last sitting. I will not repeat those that you had referred to, but there are some others that we can put into the particular category. I think among them there are 3 students who actually passed, one of whom was my ex-student and ex-footballer. And when people leave us at that early age, it could be very difficult for their families. We also, on behalf of this Honorable House, we also want to sympathize with the people of Cuba. As we know, there was a serious catastrophe. And one of our colleagues, I heard mention of the passing of the former Senator Ferdinand Henry. His wife was a very close colleague of mine in District 5 as a principal, and I know that these families are going through difficulties. I also want to beg your leave to also express condolences to a former principal from the same area, Mrs. Claret Ramo, principal of the Larry Shoes Combined School, who was laid to rest during the period between then and now, and ask that we remember the children. Again, this is an education bill, and we need to remember the children and the teachers, the parents, and all who have been affected by the passing of those soldiers and hardworking St. Lucians. Even in the constituency where I live, we also lost a very well-known gentleman, Mr. Elias Steve Louisi, who is being laid to rest on Saturday. And so I just want to express, as we did and other members have, our condolences and a word of comfort to the families of those individuals. We also heard that the Persons Cycle of Hon Spencer and other awardees, as you did mention, have been complimented, and I want to join you and the Parliament in doing so. But I also want to say that as we celebrate their success, we want to make sure that their welfare is not placed on the back burner, and that everything we do in this country will lend support to the pronouncements that we make. So, Madam President, on to the motion of the Education Quality Improvement Project, the EQUIP project, that we are here to authorize the borrowing through this resolution of $16,192,000 US dollars, or equivalent to $43,232,640 EC dollars, if you do the conversion. It is a significant sum, and it is a significant step. I have no problems with the government making any attempt to address any matter relating to education. And Madam President, anyone who has followed my contributions in this Honorable House from day one, I've always made a plea, I've always implored the government to pay attention to our human resource. And our human resource, including our youth, our children, our hardworking St. Lucians, and everybody who contributes to the total development of this country. So when I hear that the government is going to borrow money to do anything to alleviate crime, to alleviate health issues, education, poverty, whatever it is, as long as it is going to help to improve our human resource, I am happy. However, I have always endeavored to provide certain little guidelines and my own advice from time to time, as well as words of caution to the government as we go ahead and implement whatever programs we are borrowing funds for. Today is no different, because I have paid attention to the pronouncements made by the Prime Minister, to the Minister for Education, who are the lead persons when it comes to implementing policy on education. And while these pronouncements have been made about the sums of money that are to be borrowed, I just want to draw our attention, the attention of this Honorable House, to some of the issues that I think are very critical and that we should pay attention to with regard to the use or the purpose of the use of these funds. Madam President, first of all, we have to establish the objective for the EQUIP program being implemented. And we must also remember, I know the members opposite like to take us back to where things started and who did what and who should take credit. I will not fail at any moment in this honorable house to give Jack his jacket, but also to be fair to anyone or any group who has to take credit or not take credit for what has to happen. We must remember that this education quality improvement project started somewhere. This EQUIP program started somewhere. And I have not heard anybody mention, you know, who actually initiated it. And we all know the St. Lucia Labour Party under Mario Michel and Didicus Jules, right? Minister and PS, were the ones who actually initiated this. So I have no difficulty in saying it's a good program. But we must give credit where credit is due. You would listen and think that, you know, this thing just jumped out of the sky and nobody knew or nobody knows where it started. I also want to say, Madam President, that we're not talking about who builds schools. And don't try to distract me. I've told you guys this morning, I'm very focused on what I came to do. And Madam President, I intend to stick to my presentation and not be distracted by any side statements that are being thrown at me. Madam President, the objective of the EQUIP program is very clear. And the Minister for Education quite correctly articulated what the objective is. And the objective is to improve the quality, equity, efficiency, and effectiveness of the education system. We have no problems with that because that is very prudent and very, very appropriate. So, Madam President, if that is the reason why we have the program, and we are going to borrow $16 million to make sure that it is continued, I don't understand the connection between the policy statements that are being made by, first of all, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education, and then the actions that we are taking when we go ahead and borrow monies. And I will cite a few examples, Madam President. First of all, we all remember that the Prime Minister tried to make a comparison between expenditure on each student and the quality of education. While he made those, and he did so in this honorable house during the last sitting, while he made those statements, I didn't hear anything to guide us and to say what are the indicators of that expenditure per child. I would have liked to hear that. Because when we make general statements, we must remember children are not just entities. You can talk about a building or a vehicle or a piece of land and say that you inject $200,000 in it and you do some farming and then you expect to make a profit. When you talk about people, especially children, we have a tendency to compare our investment in people in terms of dollars and cents. And we don't really have ways of measuring the return on those investments. So when we talk about the investment we're making in children, we have to be very careful how we measure the returns. And some of the returns on those investments, Madam President, are evident in this honorable house. The investments that were made in our education, in mine, in yours, in every single member of this house, are now bearing fruit. This is one of the ways we can measure. But we must not think that it is something tangible. So when we make those pronouncements, let us pay attention to the fact that we are investing in people, especially young people. Madam President, I also heard comparisons being made, and I will get to the comparisons very shortly. But let me just say, first of all, that there are 4 schools that were named in terms of the rehabilitation that needs to be done. Among them was the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. The other 3, I'll just leave them alone. But I have a special interest in this Arthur Lewis Community College because it is our premier educational institution in St. Lucia. It's our pride and joy, just like Sir Arthur Lewis was. So, Madam President, I understand from the pronouncements made by the Minister of Education that part of that loan will be sourced to rehabilitate, do some rehabilitation work at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. But I also want to say that while we pay attention to the physical structure of the school, which is obviously a good thing, we must also pay attention to the other essential needs of Sir Arthur Lewis. I have not heard anything about the appointment of a principal for the school. As we speak, Sir Arthur Lewis Community College is still without a leader, a principal. Somebody might be acting, they may be a board and so on. But that is an important aspect of the holistic care and development of the institution. And so, Madam President, it is, yes, we borrow money to fix this and to do that. And even when I speak about the fixing, I also want to make certain observations about what this government has said before about spending money to fix schools. And you come to this honorable house today and you think that this government is so committed to repairing schools. I will get to that, Madam President, without disrespecting anyone. Because we must be consistent. And when my colleague mentioned this thing about uncertainty, there is merit in it. There is merit in it. But I will not use the specific terms. I will describe what I'm talking about by looking at the inconsistencies that exist between the policy statements that are being made and certain utterances by key members of this government, the Prime Minister included, the Minister of Education included, and what kinds of decisions and actions are being taken on behalf of the people of St. Lucia. So, Madam President, let me get back to the issue of the rehabilitation. Yes, we should spend money to fix schools, and I've always said we should. And there was a time we were not sure whether the Prime Minister believed that we should fix schools, because he was referring to fixing the curriculum before schools are being fixed. Has the curriculum been fixed, Madam President? Now that we are borrowing $16 million to go and repair schools, have we fixed the curriculum? So where is the consistency in what is being said and what we're doing? I am for both, Madam President. I am for fixing the curriculum and for fixing schools. I support both positions. But how do we determine the way in which we do it? Do we just make loose statements all over the place and then come back to the very same thing that we've been told that we should do? So, Madam President, I believe that Arthur Lewis needs all the attention that it should get, but I also think that we should deal with the issue of the administration of the school. Deal with the issue of the organizational structure of the school. Because even if you fix it and make it look beautiful, if the organizational structure of Sir Arthur Lewis is not attended to, we are going to have problems up there. Lots more problems than we already have. In terms of the conduct of the students, the operations of the college, the performance of the various departments, and the general leadership. So we must pay attention to that. But I'm hoping that when we come back to this house to mention anything relating to that money that has been spent, and when the government is going to account for that $60 million, that we believe that we'll be hearing that they have fixed some of those issues that are associated with the running of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Madam President, I heard the Minister for Education also mentioning that there was an intention to do some work on low-performing schools. Thank you, bro. Low-performing schools. Now, as a former teacher and principal, we have to be very careful when we make certain statements that can seem to be labeling. We must admit the truth sometimes and see that some schools or some individuals are not performing up to standard. Sometimes we have to say that to them. I have had to say to my teachers, I believe that, your class or this student can do better or you can do better. There's nothing wrong in saying so. But, Madam President, when you say low-performing schools, what are the indicators of a low-performing school? I didn't hear the minister explain that. What schools are you referring to? And how are you going to determine from that $16 million which schools will get the attention or the assistance that they need because you call them low-performing schools? The Ministry of Education has not indicated any specific process that they are going to use to determine low-performing schools. Are you going to just, Madam President, look at their performance at common entrance, if they are primary schools? Only the academic performance levels? Or if they are secondary schools, how many CXE passes they get? How are you going to determine a low-performing school? Will you take other issues into context? Now, I know that there are principals and teachers listening out there, because when we come to this house and say that, as my colleague Senator Mangal indicated, that the government is borrowing money to take care of education, yes, which teacher and student and principal doesn't want to hear that? They love to hear that. They want to know that the government is doing that. And then you say, we are going to fix some low-performing schools, some people will become very anxious. Who are the low-performing schools you're talking about? So we can decide to assist schools that need assistance. But before we label people or put any kind of stereotype, we must be very careful. I have seen it happen when we have awards of excellence, when certain schools or certain individuals get certain, accolades based on all kinds of criteria. And you cause a lot of distress and harm, and people are offended because they do not understand what it is you're rewarding. In the very same way, if you are going to address issues relating to schools, try to make sure that you consult with the people who understand the runnings of schools before you come to a school and say you're going to fix this or you're going to do that for them, and in their own assessment of themselves, that is not what they believe they need. Some of what we think when we sit in these air-conditioned places and we say are the needs of institutions are not necessarily what these institutions actually need. And Madam President, we have to pay attention to these things, because we may spend money on a school that perhaps we might say that what we needed to do is to put a library in there because we believe that the students are not reading very well. But what the school may have needed is a remedial program instead of a library, because the methodology in teaching the reading was not being done well. And so we have wasted money to build something that is almost useless to the school. So I'm saying so, Madam President, to say that when we are going to make those statements, we must qualify them. And in fact, it is even better if we can do so with some kind of empirical data. Because education is a very sensitive matter and is very, very close to my heart. Madam President, I will move on and say that I remembered also hearing one of the reasons that was given for spending that money is that there's climate vulnerability assessment that was done on school buildings. And the Prime Minister indicated that, not the Prime Minister, the Minister for Education indicated that as part of that process of climate vulnerability resilience or assessments that were being done, some of the schools have to be repaired. But Madam President, I listened to that and I remembered we came to this Honorable House to debate the disaster vulnerability bill, I think it was. And I stood up and was pleading with this government to say to them that in addition to schools being centers for learning or educational institutions, most of our schools are being used as hurricane shelters and for after-school programs and for all other things in the constituencies. So, Madam President, what is the real reason why that has been given for repairing the schools? Is it to facilitate the new curriculum that has not been reviewed? Or is it to do exactly what I was talking about? If it is the latter, Madam President, I'm very happy. I'm very happy. Because any school you fix and it becomes more resilient and it is improved as a shelter, we should be happy for that. But we must also be careful with, as I said, if you're saying that you need to fix the curriculum before you decide which schools to repair, and then you say you have to try to repair low-performing schools or to fix low-performing schools, what is the real reason? I am extremely confused. What is the real reason? What is the thinking behind the spending? And I think that is the point that my colleague was alluding to. When you make decisions and you're going to borrow money from the taxpayers' pockets and spend, you must be very clear what your purpose is and decide what you're going to do with the money. We're hearing different things and I'm not really sure what is the purpose. I don't know if it is to fix schools because to make them disaster, to reduce their vulnerability. I'm not sure if it is based on the low performance. I'm not sure. There was also mention of the...
Madam President, just for invoking Standing Order 37.1, Madam President, and again it speaks of a senator shall confine his observations to the subject under discussion, and the member is clearly within the subject matter But the premise upon which he's building his, or he has built his discussion is on discussions that never took place within this chamber. The discussions that were discussed within the lower house. And I would appreciate, Madam President, if he makes reference to what has been discussed here and not what was discussed in the lower house, because he spoke about what the Prime Minister has said, what the Minister of Education has said, and how can, I'm just seeking your clarification, Madam President, whether or not it is within his right or to build his debate on matters that were not discussed or are not being discussed in this House.
Senator Ferdinand, please proceed with your discussion.
Thank you, Madam President. I think your silence on that speaks volumes. This is the Honorable House of Parliament, and I believe that there is no other basis that you can use than what goes on in this Honorable House. And I think it is healthy that when we make our contributions, instead of just, all over the place, that we focus it on the business of the House. So, Madam President, I will proceed. And I will continue on the point that I was making before the interruption. Madam President, my point here is that I have no difficulty with the government, any government, deciding to borrow money if they have to, or to source funding or grants to improve the quality and efficiency of our education system. That has been my cry from day one. My difficulty is with the government's justification or explanation or reason for what they're doing. There needs to be a very clear education policy direction in this country. There needs to be. And at the moment, I am drawing reference, Madam President, to a number of different statements, pronouncements that are being made by both the Prime Minister and the Minister responsible for education. And there is no better source for me to reference, because they are the ones responsible for whatever is going on in education in this country. I cannot go and source what somebody said in Jamaica or by the road. I have to base my argument on what the leaders of government are saying. And if there is apparent disparity or inconsistency with what they're saying, and I have to draw it to the attention of this Honorable House and ask that it be very clear. So I hope that going forward, that this kind of inconsistency is not going to continue, and that it will give us as St. Lucians the privilege of knowing that our government knows what it's doing. Anytime you have that kind of inconsistency, somebody saying something there, something is being said there, you're not sure what's going on, it creates uncertainty in the minds of the people. We want, and it tells you, and it gives value to what my colleague was saying. Uncertainty. So it's not something we pull out of the sky, it is real. Madam President, I will continue, and I will mention another example that was given. And I think that one will be a topic of interest for my honorable colleague responsible for health, as well as my honorable colleague responsible for national security. One of the reasons that was given was that part of this borrowing will be used to tackle drug use by primary school students. And I remember the Minister for Education quite rightly expressing her deep concern for children in the primary school stage already getting involved in drug use. Which one of us here would not be concerned or should not be concerned about children before the age of 11 experimenting with drugs? If we're not concerned, then we are heartless. We should be. And I welcome that. We need to go down as early as possible to have interventions to prevent certain practices. Yeah. I've always said that. That's right. And so, Madam President, that one was very interesting. But again, the pronouncement was made, but again, I heard no mention of how, And I'm not expecting the minister to come and explain every single thing in detail in the House, but give an indication of how you intend to do so. And I have not heard anything about the inclusion or the collaboration of the two departments that can very well help to achieve that objective. How could you talk about spending money on rehabilitation, or not rehabilitation, on money on children to prevent them from getting involved in drugs at a primary school level? You're talking about children below 11 years, and you say nothing about the collaboration between the schools and the Department of National Security. And both myself and Senator, the minister responsible for national security, have spoken about
Senator Ferdinand, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you, madam. I will complete with you. Thank you. Both myself and the minister responsible for national security have made reference to the nexus between the police and schools with the CRB officers and so on in helping to prevent crime and to prevent some of the social problems. As well, the Minister for Health would be interested to ask or to note that in dealing with these issues, they are sometimes involving, or they also sometimes involve, the Department of Gender Relations. So many of our kids, our children from the primary school program who have difficulties have to be referred to professionals in that department. So if you're going to spend money on, addressing drug use at the lower school level, fine, lovely. But is there any connection, collaboration? I don't know. These are the things that we should be saying in this honorable House. These are the things that we need to hear, so that I would have heard that in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Education is doing X, Y, Z to combat. That is what we need to be hearing in this honorable House. And not some of the things that I heard. And some of the things and my colleague didn't want me to refer to the lower house, but that is where the real debate begins. And this House continues so that it can move to be approved. So, Madam President, I heard things about rats in schools and so on. This is not what we should be discussing. How, if we're going to borrow money, how are we going to collaborate and include and involve the relevant stakeholders, the professionals within the health sector, within the law enforcement authorities, along with the schools and the social services. And I can even extend it to the Minister for Social Transformation. Because there are persons within that department who can also collaborate. So we have to be very careful when we make those blunt blank statements and not pay attention to the way in which it can be properly implemented. Otherwise, I will have reservations about my support for that resolution. Because if I don't see how it's going to work, if I don't see the relevance of it, then how can I support it? So, Madam President, I move on because I think I'm running out of time. It pleased me to hear that we were going to consider special needs and special education when it comes to the spending of that money. I was very pleased to hear that. But at the same time, I want to say, Madam President, that if we are going to pay attention to special needs and special education, we need to know what are some of the very essential actions that the government must take. Because special needs and special education, like I mentioned in the last sitting of the House, cannot be approached haphazardly. There are reasons why we have what we call the mainstreaming, where you take children with special needs and you try to integrate them into the regular school. And you have special units or special centers that are committed or dedicated to taking care of these children. So I want to say that, again, it is not very clear how this is going to be done. But like I mentioned, and I think there was mention made to the special education unit integrating a part of the previous Dennery infant school, which the building, to help to implement that program, and that would be lovely. If that is done, that would be fantastic. But I await the actual, the actual process before I make any points on that. Now, Madam President, one of the things that was spoken about again was the issue of students' well-being and school feeding. I think the government has boasted several times nutritional needs, and I didn't hear anything mentioned from that grunt. Maybe there are other plans for it, and I hope they come. And by the way, if we are talking about making schools, improving schools, national, and listen to the terms being used, quality improvement of education, the holistic development of the child, we have to pay attention to the basic needs before the aesthetic needs, the basic needs of nutrition, of care, of security, very important, before we teach them how to use computers and so on. So that is something that we need to be very mindful of. Madam President, just as it occurred a few years ago, a year and a half ago, there seems to be a lack of evidence of planning when it comes to how we go about making our investments in education and in critical areas. There seems to be a reactive approach, and that has led to some difficulties. Just as it happened with the Miku Secondary School situation, where the parents had to get involved and with the repair of the school. This was clearly one of the areas that I was looking forward to hearing something about when the announcement was made that the government was going to borrow $16 million. Because we talk about repair of schools. I didn't hear anything about Migo Secondary School. I remember the minister, the last thing that she mentioned was that she was going to try to scrape up some money. But there's a good place to scrape up some money right now. I also made a couple statements about the Beanfield Comprehensive Secondary School. Madam President, tomorrow is common entrance. The students of grade 6 are writing common entrance tomorrow. I wish them well. I wish them well. I hope that all of them can do well and that all of them will make their parents proud. And they will be able to attend the schools that they had as their first choice and that they have scored, they have attained the score to attend, including the Beanfield Secondary School. I am hoping that that is the case. And I implore the government to find some money out of this, if they can. And if the funds will not come before that, pay some attention to the situation with that, in that school. Because if the students have made their first choice as Beanfield Secondary, a school that is on its way to becoming a school of choice in the South, and that in September they will find themselves having to go somewhere else that may be further away from their homes, that their parents may not be able to afford, or that will disrupt their regular plans, it can again become another problem that we do not need. So while we're talking about making that big investment, and we're so proud that we're borrowing all that money to spend on education, quality of our education, we must remember that there are some simple things that we must pay attention to, very simple things. So I hope that this matter has been addressed and will be attended to. I offered suggestions for them. I always do. I don't come here just criticizing the government. Sure. I make observations, and I usually offer a suggestion or two. Sure. And I always say that I'm not doing it with any fee. I am not one of the consultants. And I'm not asking for a consultancy service. I am a proud St. Lucian educator who always sees a need to add my voice and my advice to what is going on. If we know what is good for the students, and I'm sure we do, make sure that these children, when they go to school in September, get a chance to be at the school of their first choice. And not forced to go somewhere else where the parents are going to suffer. And then we come and boast about borrowing $16 million to do what? Finally, Madam President, I heard that some land was being sourced, and I think the former Prime Minister did mention that that was in process. Near the Dame Paulette Louise's school from those funds, and that sounds like very good news. Now, while it is heartening to hear that the government has finally acknowledged the efforts that were made by the now opposition in acquiring this land, and that this is not one of the projects they will stop, but that they are going to continue, I want to also say on a word of caution that children who have behavioral problems or children who are going to be assigned to those special institutions, that we pay very careful attention before we go about building something, acquiring property and building something for them, and we have not prepared the system to integrate them. That's all I'm going to say on that. Madam President, I like to offer solutions.
Senator Ferdinand, you have 5 minutes more.
Thank you. I'm doing very well within my time. Madam President, I'd like to offer solutions. But I also want to say that when the solutions are offered, please, government of St. Lucia, please pay attention to some of the value that is in some of those solutions. And stop making excuses. The last time I spoke in this honorable house, I asked the question whether this government is a government of excuses. This is 2 years. 2 years. You're right? That's 2/5 of your period in government. Get to work. It's not about turning back and blaming everybody for what has happened. We know what has happened. That's why they were voted out and you are in, so get to work. Madam President, I say so because every time there seems to be a challenge or an opportunity to make something happen, as we have here in this borrowing of $16 million, to make something happen to improve the quality of education, we have to listen to what this government did not do a few years ago. Madam President, I hope that's the last time I'm going to have to say so. And Madam President, we still have some unanswered questions. While some of our colleagues are asking questions of the previous government, we have some questions that are unanswered with this government. And I will mention one of them relating to this very education problem. We had NSDC that was quote unquote replaced with CHTTI. And at this point, I am uncertain about what is going on with the CHTTI situation. And I'm going to leave it at that. I am very uncertain, and I think the government needs to be very clear to St. Lucians, because there are young people who have taken loans, they have commitments, they're trying to improve their education quality, so they have made commitments, rightfully so, but right now they are very uncertain about what next. So we must provide those answers as soon as possible. So let me end, Madam President, by saying that the wealth of a nation and its prosperity is highly dependent on its health, its education, its human resource. And the way in which we take care of that will determine our prosperity. And so I implore the government to not allow what has happened in our health sector to happen in our education sector. We can ill afford a double whammy. We need to be very mindful that we do not allow our education sector to go down that road. Because if that happens, no matter what else we do, there's no way that we're going to be able to survive. And so I end my presentation, Madam President, by reminding all of us that education is a major neutralizing agent between the haves and the have-nots. So Arthur Lewis said it very nicely. And it also prevents the social polarization that tends to occur when governments have no direction. And if there's one thing we have left in St. Lucia to prevent that from happening, is our education sector. Let us make sure that we do not allow it to go down that road. We do not allow it to become a crisis situation so that our country can continue to prosper. I thank you, Madam President.